What is going on, everybody? It is the Icebreaker here, back with another video, some more NHL content here. And to end off this short series, we are doing the Atlantic Division, ranking them 8-1 to the worst team in the division up to the best team in the division, in my opinion. I'll give you guys my takes on each of the seedings, who are the teams that I believe will make the playoffs, which teams will fall short, and which teams will be well on the outside looking in. But looking at this Atlantic Division, this is quite possibly the best division in the NHL. And you can make a case that basically any of these 8 teams have the potential to maybe push for the playoffs and make some noise once they get into it. Okay, maybe not every single team in the Atlantic. There is one team that I think is definitely well behind the rest of the division, and that's the Montreal Canadiens. So I have them finishing last, but I have them improving a little bit off of last season, 34, 38, and 10 for 78 points. So a 10-point improvement from last year. They finished with 68 points. But I do not think this is the worst team in the league. I think they're actually going to be a little bit better than people expect. I don't have them in the bottom 5. You know, a lot of people think they'll be a bottom 5 team. I think on paper, possibly, but I definitely think a huge reason why they weren't very good last season was their injuries. I believe they were first in total man games lost throughout the entire season. So I expect the team to be healthier, and I just think they're going to be a little bit more surprising, but still a rebuilding team. They're in the hardest division. Probably not going to be a playoff team. Obviously, this is still a very young team. A lot of new young pieces that they're bringing in here. A guy like Juraj Slavkovsky had a really tough rookie season. Hopefully, he can bounce back in a big way, have a huge breakout sophomore year. That would be huge for this team and where they are in their rebuild. A guy that came over from the Avs that they acquired via trade, Alex Newhook's another guy destined to break out as well in an elevated role. He was playing mainly in the third line role with Colorado, and I think with Montreal, he'll have every opportunity to play in the top 6, so he could be somebody who produces a little more offense than he did in his first 2 seasons in the league. And they were kind of, deep at forward, so they got rid of some pretty bad contracts, Mike Hoffman being the most notable. Still a decent middle 6 winger, but at the same time, they didn't really need him in the lineup. I think there's a lot of young guys that are looking for spots in that forward group, so I think Hoffman was kind of on the outside looking in, so trading him was the good thing to do, in my opinion, for Kent Hughes and the Habs. Red Pitlick's another depth piece, move him over to Pittsburgh, traded Joel Edmondson to create some more room for the blue line, some young guys coming up as well, need to take up some roster spots and develop those guys in the NHL, so I think Edmondson being traded was a good move. Just a lot of guys that they just sold off. Drouin's another guy who left for Colorado, best of luck to him. They also brought in Casey DeSmith, who was a part of that Erik Karlsson trade. They just traded away Petrie back to Detroit, to his hometown team. Casey DeSmith, I think, in all likelihood, is probably going to be moved. Maybe even by the time this video gets released, he could already be traded on his way out. Jake Allen, I don't think they're moving him. Sam Montembeault, in my opinion, is clearly the starter on this team, so I think Casey DeSmith is probably a guy that you can get some good value for. Taking a look at their top 5 scorers, I think Nick Suzuki's the obvious one to lead the team in scoring. He's been knocking on the door of being one of the better young two-way centermen in the NHL. This past season is coming off a career year, 66 points, including 26 goals. Played the full season, has yet to miss a game in his career. So I'm guessing that should continue if he can stay healthy. I think, playing with alongside Cole Caulfield, who only played half the season, if those two guys are going to be together the entire season, I think their statistics should elevate. So Nick Suzuki, I think he's going to have quite a significant improvement in his statistics, and he could easily push per point per game. So have him scoring 29 goals, 77 points, and being that lead main offensive guy for the Habs. But their leading goal scorer is obviously going to be Cole Caulfield, played at nearly a 45-plus goal pace, I believe, last season. He only played 46 games, but he had 26 goals. So over a full season, I definitely expect him to score at least 40 goals. Worst comes to worst, he's in the 35 to 40 range, but I definitely think 40-plus goals is definitely in the cards for him. 50 is even his ceiling, I would say, and he could push for 70 points as well. He's just one of the better goal scorers in the entire NHL. He's already proven that, and he's just their best sniper threat on that Habs team. Kirby Dach, 3rd on the team. I'm predicting to maybe push for 60 points. He kind of broke out his first season with the Habs, only played about 58 games, I believe, but he did produce some decent numbers, put up 38 points. More of a playmaker, so I think he's going to have a lot of assists, more so than goals, obviously. But I think it wouldn't shock me if he pushed for about 20 goals, but I definitely think 55 to 60 points is very possible for him as the number 2 center, carrying his own line. I think he has that offensive potential. Former 3rd overall pick. I definitely think there's more offense to give there. Mike Matheson, I got in 4th, leading all blue liners on this team in scoring. 55 points. He had a great season last year. In just 48 games, he had 34 points. So I definitely could envision him scoring north of 50 points. Quarterback in that top power play unit. If he plays a full season, he kind of broke out last year. He's in his prime of his career, 28, 29 years old. And then lastly, I got Alex Newhook rounding out the top 5. Like I said, an elevated role, going to be playing top 6 minutes. I could envision him maybe playing on the top line with Suzuki or Caulfield, but if not, play him with Kirby Dach on the second line. I definitely think he's capable of having a low-key breakout season north of 20 goals and 50 points. Look, I like this team. This is obviously my favorite team, but I have to be unbiased here. The Habs are clearly not good enough to be a playoff team anytime soon, at least the next couple of seasons, I would think, just given how much tougher the Atlantic Division has gone around them. But still, I like their young pieces. I think they're moving in a really solid direction here. A lot of great young guys that are going to lead this team moving forward. I think their defense, even their prospect pool, their depth up front in terms of where they are, one of the better ones in the league in the prospect pool. And even on the blue line, a lot of young guys who are really trying to establish themselves. Caden Gooley, Justin Barron, Jordan Harris, Arbor Jacki. Didn't even mention Logan Mailloux, who could burst onto the scene next season. Lane Hudson, obviously highly touted guy. So they have a lot of really solid blue liners for the future. And in goal, I mean, that's right now is the question mark. They don't have a ton of guys in the pipeline in goal, although they did draft a couple of guys this past draft. But right now, they're going to ride with Montembeault and Allen. I actually think Montembeault is a pretty solid goaltender. The statistics wouldn't say he didn't have the greatest season, but I think he was actually very underrated. Goal save above expected, I believe, was top 15, maybe top 10 even in the league. So he definitely is a lot better than people think, and I think he could potentially steal the starting reign from Jake Allen full-time and be the guy that gets the majority of the starts if he plays north of 50 games. I just think overall this team's going to be healthier, and I think the team is going to take a step forward. Every guy is going to develop, take a step forward in their play, and as a result, I think overall they should be an improved roster and definitely be a little bit better than most people claim. I actually have them 13th in the East, which I believe would rank them over 3 teams in the Metro, so that could be a bit of a hot take, but I think the Habs are going to surprise a little bit of people of how competitive they're going to be and could hover around 500 for most of the season, but ultimately they're still the worst team in this division and they won't be making the playoffs this year. But after Montreal, this is where things get really interesting. I got a couple of hot takes here for the Eastern Conference, especially for the Atlantic. 7th, I got the Florida Panthers, fresh off a Stanley Cup Finals appearance. This could be a pretty huge hot take here. A lot of people might not agree with this, but I got them 39-34-9 for 87 points. I do have them in the playoff hunt. Obviously, I still think they have a very talented roster. But I think when it comes down to it, I look at the team, they went on a huge run, shorter offseason, and they got some key injuries to start the season. They were already thin on the blue line. But if they're going to expect to miss Brandon Montour and Aaron Ekblad for a big chunk, at least for the start of the season, I think that's a massive blow to their chances. I don't think their defense is nearly good enough to offset, those injuries or to really cancel them out or, keep them afloat, as I would say here. Oliver Ekman-Larsson, Nico Mikkola, I guess, are their replacements, added, D-depth, but I don't think either of these guys are going to really move the needle. Nico Mikkola obviously is more of a third pair or a 7th defenseman. Oliver Ekman-Larsson, in a good role, could still be a serviceable top 4 guy, but he's clearly not what he was with the Arizona Coyotes, where he was in the prime of his career. So I don't think he's going to produce at the rate that Ekblad and Montour are. No one on that team is going to replace them offensively, of course, and even just their impact on the blue line overall. Gustav Forsling probably is their best defenseman to start the years, I would say. But I don't trust the blue line whatsoever. I also question Sergei Bobrovsky. He had an unbelievable playoffs, but over the course of his career at the Panthers has been the epitome of inconsistency. Hasn't been really that type of top-end goaltender, at least in the regular season in his career with the Panthers. So I just question if he can really carry that over from his amazing playoff run to the regular season. I mean, if he can become that brick wall, then the Panthers are clearly a playoff team because offensively, this is still a juggernaut. They have a really, really good players. Their top 6 is absolutely loaded. So I have no question about them scoring goals, but at the end of the day, I do think that the injuries to their defense and just the goaltending inconsistency will be costly for them. And that's why I think they could miss the playoffs. But in terms of their top 5 scorers, they have a ton of great guys. Matthew Tkachuk, if he's healthy, he's another guy that might not start the season because, he tore his sternum, I believe, in the playoffs. Who knows if he's ready for training camp. If he is, though, he should be, good to go. He's one of the top players in the NHL. You could argue he might be top 5 in the league, actually. I mean, coming off back-to-back 100-point seasons, I'll say he hits 100 again. Again, I think his production takes a little bit of a dip just because of the injuries, and I think the Panthers maybe take a bit of a step back. Alexander Barkov's a 90-plus point player, but, he just needs to stay healthy. He just has had some injury issues over the last couple of seasons. Verhaeghe had a great season last year. I'm not sure if he hit 40 goals, but I think 35 goals, roughly 70 points. Definitely seems about right. Sam Reinhart's another guy who can hover around 30 goals and 70 points as well. And Evan Rodriguez, I think, is a good replacement on that top six, and I think he's capable of having a breakout season, surrounded with some very talented players in Florida. He's a guy that I actually think could break out, push for north of 60 points. I would not be surprised whatsoever. Like I said, the injuries, I think, are going to be costly. Question their goaltending. And just the fact that the Atlantic Division as a whole has improved. The Panthers are a team I could easily see on the outside looking in come April. But, this team has proven us wrong before in both ways. They've always disappointed me when I've had them really high. But when I've had them lower, they've always seemed to exceed my expectations. So maybe this is a way of me, always being wrong about the Panthers. This time around, they'll actually be one of the better teams in the league, maybe be a top 3, top 2 team in the Atlantic. I could see that happening as well, given how they just made the finals and, they still have a very talented roster. But I'm going to go bold here and say they missed the playoffs. Now, you can argue that this next team should be 7th in the division, but I have them ranked 6th here, the Detroit Red Wings. I think they're going to take another step forward this season, 41, 33, and 8. I have them with 90 points. Although I still think they fall short of the playoffs, but they are, they're a gradually improved team in my opinion. I just think that, again, the Atlantic is too tough. They're still a very young team, and there's still some growing pains there, but ultimately I do think they're going to be in the hunt. Probably miss the playoffs by 5 or 6 points is my guess. But overall, still a good team. I think they're improving. They're definitely ready to be in the hunt. I know they kind of sort of fizzled out towards the end of the season. They were selling at the deadline, only finished with 80 points. So this is another team I think is going to take a 10-point jump in the standings. I definitely think their offense is capable of being a lot better. Add a guy who's Alex DeBrincat, who is a perennial 35, 40 goal scorer. He's coming off a down season, even though he still had over 60 points. I guess the 27 goals was a bit disappointing, but he's fully healthy. If he's playing on the top line with great playmakers and Lucas Raymond and Dylan Larkin, I think he should definitely be returning to that 40-goal form that he once had with the Blackhawks. So I definitely think that top line has the potential to really carry the load offensively and kind of dominate their matchups for most of the season. And I think their defense is also improved. I like the additions of Shane Gostisbehere and Jeff Petrie and even Justin Hall. Look, it's not a great defense by any means. There's still some growing pains there, and they still have a little bit of issues they need to shore up. But at the same time, the name recognition is there. I think their defense is definitely improved. And I just think a full season, Ville Husso, maybe was a little bit overworked and really, his play kind of tailed off the second half of the season. But I think he is still a solid starting goaltender. And at least if he can get a little bit of support with his now backup in James Reimer, I actually think is a very solid backup. The goaltending should kind of work itself out. So I think overall the Red Wings are improved and should definitely be in the playoff hunt. Top 5 scorers for me, Dylan Larkin is clearly the guy. He's the captain, their leader. Should be roughly a point per game. I think just based on the guys they have on paper on that top line, I think all of their production should elevate and their point total should inflate a bit and improve. So that's why I think Dylan Larkin will actually surpass over a point per game and have 85 points as a result. DeBrincat, I think he bounces back in a huge way, returns to that 40-goal form like I mentioned earlier, and maybe pushes for 80 points as well. And Lucas Raymond coming off, he had a good rookie season, a little bit of a sophomore slump, if you would say there, but at the same time, I think he still has the high offensive ceiling. He was a 4th overall pick, right? So I definitely think in that top line role, he should be in for a massive breakout third year. So I have him with 25 goals and 72 points to complete that top line. I think that top line has the potential to be one of the best in the NHL as far as I'm concerned. And then it kind of tails off a little bit. The secondary scoring I'm a little bit concerned about, especially you lose guys like Dominic Kubelik and Pius Suter, but there's still some decent names there. They still got David Perron. JT Compher's another guy I highlighted here, 54 points. I think he should be about the same as he was with Colorado. I mean, he wasn't necessarily playing with elite talent with the Avs on that second line anyway. He wasn't playing with McKinnon or Ranton for most of the year anyway. So I still think he should hover around 50 points. I mean, he's the number 2 center. He should be expected to produce at that rate. I'd also put in Moritz Seider. He's their best overall defenseman, and offensively he's obviously very underrated in my opinion. I think he could push for 60 points just because the Red Wings offense I think is going to take another step forward. So I do think they are going to continue to get better and better as the years go on. But as of right now, I'm holding off on them making the playoffs. I just think the Atlantic is way too good. And in terms of like other younger teams in the Atlantic, I think they might just be a step behind from the Ottawas and the Buffaloes, and we'll get to them a little bit later here. Obviously, have them ranked higher. So I do think they are ultimately going to miss the playoffs, but they're going to be a lot closer than they were last season. They're going to be a very competitive team and very fun to watch. And the hot takes continue here. Yes, I bet against the Bruins last year to miss the playoffs. They obviously burned me and had the best regular season in NHL history, only to lose in the first round, but that's beside the point. But this year, I think the Bruins, I think there is a lot more merit to them actually taking a massive step back. Now, I have them better than what I did last season. I think last season I predicted them to have like 85 points, which was obviously crazy to assume, and that they made me look absolutely stupid. So I have them 5th in the division, 43-31-8 for 94 points. I think they're still going to be a playoff caliber team. However, I am going with the bold prediction once again. I'm picking the Bruins to miss the playoffs. I just don't think they did enough in the offseason. Look, there's some decent additions. James Van Riemsdyk, Morgan Geekie, Milan Lucic, but Morgan Geekie, at best, he's a third-line center, and Van Riemsdyk and Lucic are just, bigger, tougher sandpaper guys. I mean, Lucic more specifically, Van Riemsdyk just more of a depth scorer. Both those guys are well past the prime of their careers, over 30 years old, each of them, so I don't think those are significant additions compared to what they lost. Okay, Nick Foligno and Connor Clifton, I don't feel that's super significant, but Taylor Hall was a very huge addition in that top 9 that they just lost and had to trade away because of cap issues. And then they obviously lost Dmitry Orlov and Tyler Bertuzzi in free agency, who were huge down the stretch and in the playoffs as well, producing for the Bruins. And then also the elephant in the room, losing both Patrice Bergeron and David Krejci, your number 1 and number 2 center. Now you're running with Charlie Coyle as your number 1, or Pavel Zacha, Morgan Geekie. I guess those are your 1, 2, 3. I think those 2 losses, those 2 guys retiring, I think there'd be a much bigger blow than people think. I think the Bruins definitely rely on those guys to provide just solid two-way play. And I think the offense, like guys like Pavel Zacha, could still be there. But I think defensively overall, this team definitely does take a step back, not having a Selke caliber player in Patrice Bergeron, who's probably one of the best defensive centers ever. It's just pretty clear to me that the Bruins are not going to look the same as they did last season. I expect, obviously, they're going to take a massive step back. I think their goal scoring as a result is going to drop tremendously. Defensively on paper, they're still solid. They got Matt Grzelcyk, they got Charlie McAvoy, Brandon Carlo, and Hampus Lindholm, who, by the way, I don't expect to have the same type of offensive output he put up this past year, as well as their goaltending, still very solid. Allmark would have to repeat his Vezina caliber year for the Bruins to be, a top-tier team in the division, because I just don't think they're there anymore. But Allmark, I still think, is solid. He's not going to put up a crazy 930-plus save percentage. I just don't think that's sustainable. Jeremy Swayman, obviously, is solid. I guess you can call him the backup because Allmark right now is the starter, but both those guys are riding a tandem role, very solid goalies. But overall, I just think the offense could take a step back. The division's getting tougher, and this core as a whole is another year older, especially with Bergeron and Krejci now gone. This team is definitely going to plummet down the standings, in my opinion. But in terms of their scoring, I mean, David Pastrnak should still be in the 90 to 100 point range. I have him only scoring 90, but leading the team with 48 goals. I don't think he replicates the year he had last season, getting over 60 goals and over 110 points. He's never been that guy over the course of his career. I think it was just kind of an outlier season for the Bruins as a whole, and I think he kind of falls back down to earth, still over a point per game, still leading the team offensively, but not nearly going to have as good of a season. And then the other names are pretty self-explanatory. Brad Marchand, still a top-line winger, but his production did take a little bit of a dip this past season, and I only expect that to continue with the losses of Bergeron and Krejci, and he's also early in his mid-30s now, so I think still 70 points is decent, but for him, his standards, I think he is going to take a little bit of a step back in his production. Charlie McAvoy, however, is still their best defenseman. Took a step forward offensively, especially these past couple of seasons. So I definitely think 60 points is definitely possible. Jake DeBrusk should also hover around 60 points if he's fully healthy. I think he's a 30-goal scorer in my opinion. I think he's fit well at home. He's rescinded his trade request. I think he's a part of, the main guys on that team. He's definitely a part of that core. So I definitely think he's going to be in for a really solid year. And Pavel Zacha, I'm just basing off the fact that he's likely their top-line center now. And if he's playing with Pastrnak and Marchand, let's say, on his wings, he should be in for a really solid offensive year. I mean, he had over 50 points this past season, so I think he could probably produce something similar to that, maybe even elevate his play and establish himself as a top-line center in the league and maybe push for 60, 65 points potentially. We'll see, though. The Bruins are obviously going to be in the race. I'm not going to go on a limb like last season, say they're going to finish like lower than 90 points, 85 points, whatever. they're definitely still going to be in a position to contend for a playoff spot. However, this window to win a Stanley Cup, I think, is closing. I don't think they're a contender anymore. It obviously wouldn't surprise me if they missed the playoffs, but I just like the trend this direction, the trend that the Atlantic Division is in right now. It's on an upward trajectory. I think the Bruins are a team that, in comparison to most of the teams in the Atlantic, are probably on their way down. So with that said, I think I'm going to go bold here and say they just barely missed the playoffs. Now, I almost did play it safe and just say, you know what, I think Boston maybe is going to be in the playoffs again. Despite having an amazing year and despite what they lost in the offseason, they still should be good. But you know what? I wanted to go bold once again. I like going bold on this channel especially. So fourth, I got edging out the Boston Bruins for the 8th seed in the East in the second wild card. I'm going with the Ottawa Senators to take a step forward and make the playoffs, sneak in with a 31-7 record, barely squeaking out the Bruins for 95 points. I think they got better at every position, and I think this team is definitely on that trajectory of being finally a playoff team. It's been a while, but they've been in this rebuild. They've been doing it very well, and I think their roster is just even better than it was last season. If I was already convinced last year they were a playoff team. That obviously didn't happen, but this year I'm even more so convinced. So I think they definitely take that step forward. Just looking at the forward group, yes, they lost Alex DeBrincat, who was a huge loss to their top six. However, replaced him with Vladimir Tarasenko, who still is capable of being a really solid top six option and could definitely score some goals and provide similar production that DeBrincat provided last year. Plus, they got Dominic Kubalik in that DeBrincat trade, so he adds more depth to their lineup. Their bottom six has been the reason that's kind of held them back because they've been heavily carried by their top six offensively. So Dominic Kubalik now slotting in your third line with a Shane Pinto and a Matthew Joseph, let's say, as your third line. That's a very solid third line. I think their offense definitely got that much better. As for the defense, I don't think it improved in terms of like the offseason. They didn't really add anybody, but I just think internally it's going to be better. Obviously, they already have Thomas Chabot, who's a very solid defenseman. Obviously, question his defensive game, but he's still solid offensively, I would say. Jake Sanderson, on the other hand, I think is maybe their most complete defenseman already. Entering his second season, I thought he had a really underrated rookie year, and I think he could be in prime position to really pop off and take another step forward, both ends of the ice, especially offensively. I think there's another level to give, even though he had north of 30 points in his rookie season. And then, obviously, first full season with Jacob Chychrun, who they acquired at the deadline last season. Played really well last year, especially with the Coyotes, and looked like he was a fit with the Senators. And I think just a full season with him, complementing that blue line, I think internally they're going to be better, and they're going to be better defensively overall. So I think that's the ultimate question. The success of the Ottawa Senators comes down to their defense and their goaltending. So I think the defense is going to improve. And, adding Jonas Korpisalo, they threw a little bit too much term at him. That's kind of a little bit of a high risk, high reward type of signing for a guy like Jonas Korpisalo, who over the course of his career hasn't really fully shown that he can be a full-time NHL starter. Now, obviously, the Senators are expecting him to be that, or at the very least have a solid tandem with him and Anton Forsberg. But he's coming off a good season with the really bad Columbus Blue Jackets team. Was even better with the Kings when he got acquired. He showed, what he could be surrounded by a much better team. Now he struggled in the playoffs, however, so I'm a little concerned how that could carry over to him and his confidence. But you know what? Ottawa, I think, is a better team, and I think Jonas Korpisalo is definitely an upgrade over the likes of Cam Talbot. So I think their goaltending has improved. Overall, this is a much better roster, so they're looking to be much better, obviously. Looking at their top scorers, Tim Stützle should lead the way. I think he takes another step forward. He had 90 points last year. I'm predicting him to have 95. I could easily see him over 100 points as well. I definitely think he has that offensive ceiling. Brady Tkachuk, I got second. I have him pushing over a point per game once again, pushing for nearly 40 goals, 88 points. I think he's arrived. I think he's a superstar, one of the best power forwards, if not the best power forward in the NHL. Claude Giroux, I think his goal scoring is going to drop. I don't think he's that 35 goal scorer that he was last year, but he still should have around 70 points, especially if he's playing on the top line. He should definitely produce. Similar to like a Joe Pavelski with the Stars. Those guys are older, but they're surrounded by elite talent, young talent too, so they should get their numbers. Next, I got Drake Batherson kind of taking another step forward. I know he had kind of a rough season overall. His overall game was not very good whatsoever, but I think offensively he's still one of the better wingers, especially on this team, but definitely in the league he's still a pretty good winger. So I think he could push for 70 points. I definitely think he has that capability, over 20 goals. He's a very solid playmaker as well, so I definitely think that's possible. And Vladimir Tarasenko, I think he's going to be slightly better than last year, playing full-time in the top six. He struggled with the Blues, but the Blues weren't very good. With the Rangers, he was a lot better, but still not quite the level Tarasenko could be at. He's still only 31 years old. I definitely still think he has more to give offensively. Still kind of in the prime of his career. He's surrounded by elite talent with the Senators, so I definitely think he's still capable of pushing for 30 goals and 60-plus points. So Senators are pretty much a tough team to judge. I know a lot of people are kind of on the fence as to where they view the Senators being at entering this season, especially with the improvement of the Atlantic Division overall. But like I said, I like to go bold. I think the Senators do have the roster on paper that's capable of taking that significant step forward. As a result, I think they sneak into the playoffs. Coming in here to the top 3 in the division, I really have these next few teams kind of stacked, literally like separated by a point each, because I think that's how close the Atlantic is going to be. But third, I'm going with the Buffalo Sabres, taking another step forward from last year where they finished with 91 points. I think they'll have another little bit of an improvement as well and finally get over the hump and make the playoffs. 44-30-8 for 96 points. I think there's another team that have officially arrived. They barely missed it last year, and I only envision them getting better. I think their defense is another year older. Owen Power and Rasmus Dahlin leading the way. I think they're very solid players, obviously leading the way on the blue line. I think their blue line is going to be a lot better as a whole. Obviously, offensively, there's no doubt they're one of the best in the league. I think they were first or second in goals for last season, and a lot of guys who had north of point per game seasons. They didn't really have to add anybody because internally that offense is just absolutely loaded, and we all know the players that they have, so I definitely think their offense will not be the issue. But a big reason why I think they take a step forward is their improvement in goal. I think Devin Levi is the future starter, and as soon as this season can prove that to be the case, in a small sample size last season, I believe he only played like 7 or 8 games, but he was actually really solid for them. Now, taking a look at their top scorers, no surprise here. I got Tage Thompson leading the way. Absolutely broke out this past season. I wasn't sure he could replicate the year he had the year before, but not only did he replicate, he actually exceeded. He was even better. This guy was over a point per game. He had over 45 goals and over 90 points. And I think he takes another step forward with the Sabres. Internally, just going to be a little bit better. I think he can break north of 50 goals and 100 points. I definitely think all of a sudden he's one of the best centers in the NHL, and it's just crazy the career turnaround he's had. It's just unbelievable to watch. He's one of the best players in the league, one of my favorites to watch. Everyone likes Tage Thompson, obviously. Rasmus Dahlin, I think, is actually going to be second. I think he'll be over a point per game this season. He's one of the most elite offensive defensemen in the NHL. So I think 86 points, 20 goals. I'm predicting that to maybe it's a little bit bold, but at the same time, I think Dahlin does have the potential to be a high-producing offensive defenseman. He could be somebody next in line to maybe be a 100-point defenseman, considering how elite the Sabres offense is. Now, guys like Alex Tuch and Jeff Skinner, I don't think they're going to produce quite at the rate they did last year, but still be hovering around that 70-75 range. So I got Alex Tuch, 31 goals, 75 points. Skinner, 73 points, including 37 goals. Both those guys, on the top line with Tage Thompson. They'll do their work. I could be underestimating their abilities, obviously, because of how good they were last year, and I kind of think I technically have them taking a step back because their point per game is going to drop, but I think there's no question that they could, if they play a full season, get well over 80, 85 points, but I'll just be a little bit modest. I just think a lot of the offense was a little bit inflated, but at the same time, it's still an elite offense. And then Dylan Cousins in fifth, I think, is a 70-point player. He'll take another step forward. He was north of 65 this past season, so if he gets even more than 70, wouldn't be shocked, but he should hover around 30 goals once again. But overall, this Sabres team is definitely poised to improve and take a step forward, and I think they've finally arrived. Now, can they finally actually do it, get into the playoffs, and end the longest playoff drought in the NHL, maybe even in NHL history, if I'm not mistaken? But yeah, this is finally their time. They have arrived. This team is good. They're ready to take that step forward. And I think as soon as this season, they're going to prove everybody that they are one of the better teams in the league, and they're going to make the playoffs. And not only will they make the playoffs, I think they're top 3 in the Atlantic. Now, coming in at number 2, this is a team that got significantly worse in the offseason, but I still think internally their team is good enough to at least make the playoffs and be a solid contender. I got the Tampa Bay Lightning, 46-31-5 for 97 points. They're not the team they once were. Obviously, on paper, they lost a lot of guys. Their depth is hurting badly, but still, I believe they're a playoff team. You got a guy like Andrei Vasilevsky, still a top goalie in the NHL. He automatically makes the team a Stanley Cup contender. They still have solid blue liners and Victor Hedman and Mikhail Sergachev leading the way, had a huge breakout season. And obviously, when you have a top line of Nikita Kucherov and Braden Point and Steven Stamkos, you're always going to have a chance to win games with how elite those guys are offensively as a whole. So yeah, this core could decline. There could be concern that the Tampa Bay Lightning even missed the playoffs given how much worse they got and how much better the teams around them got. but I still think they're good enough to make the playoffs. But it's really going to come down to those depth guys. Some guys specifically are going to have to step up. I look at Brandon Hagel, had a great season last year, but he's got to sustain that, maybe even elevate his production. Another guy like Anthony Cirelli, who I'm looking at as well, to have a massive breakout season. I mean, he's their number 2 center, but he has more offense to give. I really do believe that. So I think he could be a guy that maybe finishes top 5 in scoring. I think he could surpass maybe 60 points. He's never ever surpassed 50. I don't think he's ever hit 50, let alone 60. But you know what? This is a huge opportunity for him. The Lightning, they need that depth scoring, and I think Anthony Cirelli is the guy that I would point to. Yeah, he's the guy I'm looking at, but also their top line is insane. Nikita Kucherov, 120 points. I think there's no question one of, if not the best playmaker in the NHL, should be over an assist per game like he was this past season. Quarterback specialist as well on that power play. Braden Point, not sure if he has quite the same season in terms of his goal scoring, but should still hover around 50 goals, lead the team in scoring, and about 90 points. He's obviously number 1 center, one of the best, most clutch players in the NHL. Steven Stamkos, he's a little bit older, but at the same time, he's a walking bucket. He could score goals, 30 plus. In any given season, he can even hit 40 plus because he still has that goal scoring upside, and he should hover around a point per game, but underrated playmaker as well. And then, of course, I already mentioned Cirelli, so I'll just say Sergachev here in 4th. I think he takes another step forward offensively. I know Victor Hedman maybe still is their overall best defenseman, but I think with Mikhail Sergachev finally taking over that top power play unit, he should be the guy who benefits from playing with the likes of Kucherov and Stamkos on the power play and gets a lot of points as a result. So I think he actually gets 70 points. And I just think his numbers should go up based on, the depth that the Lightning lost in the offseason. Those guys kind of have to make up for it and elevate their games that much more, which is why I think, top heavy, they're going to be so dominant this season, which is why I think their depth won't be as big of a concern, at least in the regular season. It'll be enough for them to make the playoffs. They added Connor Shear, Logan Brown, should help a little bit, but overall, they lost quite a bit, so they need guys to step up. I do think they have what it takes to do it, but I also would not be shocked if they fall completely out of the playoffs given how tough the division has gotten. But this team is still loaded. They're top heavy. I think they're still going to be competing for a playoff spot. And when it's all said and done, I don't think they're quite as bad where they completely miss. So I still think they're among the better teams in the league, and there's still some young teams. I'm not sure how big of a step forward they can take, which is why I think Tampa kind of comfortably lies 2nd place in that Atlantic, which means 1st place in the Atlantic Division. I'm going with the Toronto Maple Leafs. I think they'll finish comfortably in 1st. The division is very, very tight, but I think Toronto has the team to kind of just pull away here slightly. I don't think they're going to dominate the regular season, but I still think 49, 26, and 7 for 105 points. They're still a top 10 team in the NHL. You can argue they're top 5. Because I think it is their division to lose. There's still teams that have yet to really establish themselves in the Atlantic, whereas the Leafs, they're still a talented roster on paper from up front to their goaltending. Should make them still their division to lose. And they're definitely in for a really big season. I have concerns about their blue line, which is why I don't label them as a legit Stanley Cup contender. I think they took a huge step back defensively, losing the likes of Luke Shen and whatnot. But bringing in John Klingberg, I guess, is fine for their offense. But on the blue line, I think their defense has taken a hit. They also lost Justin Hall, who, Leafs fans will clown on him, but overall, I think he did a decent job for them in their defense group. But obviously, they still have good goaltending. They brought back Ilya Samsonov. He just needs to stay healthy, but when he was healthy, he was a really good goaltender this past season. Him and Joseph Wall, I think, is a solid tandem. And obviously, the offense is going to improve, which is why I think they're going to get by, scoring a ton of goals once again, being one of the better offensive teams in the league. Add guys like Tyler Bertuzzi and Max Domi to just further complement their top 6. They're absolutely loaded, maybe the best top 6 in the entire NHL as far as I'm concerned. And not to mention, they have the rookie in Matthew Nyes, who is actually very solid for them in the playoffs. He's probably going to be playing on their 3rd line now. A ton of offensive depth that this Leafs team has, and I just think they're poised to be one of the higher scoring teams in the league, obviously. Leading the way, Austin Matthews, I think he bounces back even though he had a good season, but 40 goals for his standards is disappointing, so I think he can return to that 55 to 60 goal range. I think he probably leads the league in 56 goals, 106 points. He just has that ceiling. Mitch Marsh also hover around 100 points. Would not surprise me if he surpasses that. I just think he's going to be feeding Matthews the puck a lot, so he's going to get a lot of assists and probably not going to focus as much on his goal scoring. So I do have his goal scoring dropping, but if he hits 30 plus again, then obviously that puts him in 100 points. William Nylander should be a point per game once again. He's in a contract year, so maybe he should even get more points if he wants to get his money, the money that he believes he deserves. But still, he's obviously an elite winger in the league, so he should be a point per game player, hover around 40 goals once again. John Tavares, losing a step, his foot speed's a little bit slower, but he's still a solid number 2 center. On most teams, he would be a number 1 center. He should have north of 70 points and 30-plus goals. And then Bertuzzi's the guy I'm highlighting to crack that top 5 over Max Domi. I just think he has a little bit more to give offensively. He showed that with the Bruins since coming over, and in the playoffs especially, he was fantastic. So I think if he's playing on the top line with Matthews and Marner, he should be a 70-plus point guy as well. Question what you want about what this team does in the playoffs. That always seems to be the question. But in terms of them in the regular season, they have one of the best forward groups in the league. Their defense I'm concerned about, but I think their goaltending is good enough to kind of offset their defensive issues that they may have. And I just think head over heels, they are comfortably the best team in the Atlantic Division as far as the regular season is concerned. With that, that is going to wrap up my standings divisional predictions here for the Atlantic Division for the upcoming NHL 2023-2024 season. Let me know as always if you guys agree or disagree with this list, and if so, tell me why or why not. I mean, I enjoy the conversation in the comments section. Let me know where you guys have as my hot takes here. Do you guys think that the Ottawa Senators, for example, could overtake a team like Boston making the playoffs? Or is Tampa poised to maybe have a massive decline? How good is Montreal? Is Detroit ready to take that step forward? Picking the Panthers to miss the playoffs, is that reasonable at all or realistic? Let me know all your thoughts. I appreciate the support. Love doing these videos. Hopefully more hockey content coming up for you guys. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll talk to you in the next one. Peace out.